Andrew Jackson was a man of stark contradictions. He was a fierce warrior and a devoted husband. He was a champion of the common man and a slave owner. He was a symbol of American democracy and a figure of controversy. Born into poverty on the edge of the American frontier, Jackson rose to become the 7th President of the United States. His life and legacy are intertwined with the triumphs and tragedies of a young nation finding its footing on the world stage. Jackson's presidency, often referred to as the Age of Jackson, marked a turning point in American history. He ushered in an era of expanded suffrage, increased executive power, and fervent nationalism. Yet his legacy is also marred by his brutal treatment of Native Americans and his unwavering support for slavery. To understand Jackson is to understand the complexities of the American character itself, its aspirations, its contradictions, and its enduring struggle to live up to its ideals. He was a man who embodied both the best and worst of his time, leaving behind a legacy that continues to be debated and dissected centuries later. Andrew Jackson's childhood was one of hardship and loss. Orphaned at a young age, he experienced the brutality of the Revolutionary War firsthand. He witnessed the death of his mother, who contracted cholera while tending to wounded soldiers, and narrowly escaped death himself. These early experiences forged in him an indomitable spirit and a deep-seated resentment towards British tyranny. At the age of 14, Jackson was captured by the British and imprisoned. He refused to shine the boots of a British officer, an act of defiance that earned him a saber slash across his face, leaving a permanent scar. This event would forever shape his view of the British and fuel his desire to prove American strength on the world stage. Despite a limited formal education, Jackson pursued a career in law. Moving to the western frontier of Tennessee, he quickly gained a reputation as a skilled lawyer and a fierce defender of his clients' interests. His success in law laid the foundation for his entry into politics, where he would champion the rights of the common man and challenge the established elite. The War of 1812 provided the stage for Andrew Jackson's rise to national prominence. On the morning of December 23rd, Keene and a vanguard of 1,800 British soldiers reached the east bank of the Mississippi River, 9 miles south of New Orleans. They could have attacked the city by advancing a few hours up the undefended river road, but Keene decided to encamp at Lacoste's plantation and wait for the arrival of reinforcements. The British invaded the home of Major Gabriel Villers, but he escaped through a window and hastened to warn General Jackson of the approaching army and the position of their encampment. Jackson's raid on the British camp following Villers' intelligence report on the evening of December 23rd, Jackson led 2,000 men in a brief three-pronged assault from the north on the unsuspecting British troops who were resting in their camp. He then pulled his forces back to the Rodriguez Canal, about 4 miles south of the city. The Americans suffered 24 killed, 115 wounded, and 74 missing, 41, while the British reported their losses as 46 killed, 167 wounded, and 64 missing. The action was consequential, since at December 25th, Pakenham's forces now had an effective strength of 5,933 out of a headcount of 6,660 soldiers. Historian Robert Quimby states that the British won a tactical victory, which enabled them to maintain their position, but they were disabused of their expectation of an easy conquest. As a consequence, the Americans gained time to transform the canal into a heavily fortified earthwork. British reconnaissance in force. On Christmas Day, General Edward Pakenham arrived on the battlefield. 2 days later, he received 9 large naval artillery guns from Admiral Cochrane, along with a hotshot furnace to silence the 2 U.S. Navy warships, the sloop of war USS Louisiana and the schooner USS Carolina, that were harassing the Army for 24 hours per day the past week from the Mississippi River. The Carolina was sunk in a massive explosion by the British, but the Louisiana survived thanks to the Baratarian pirates aboard getting into rowboats and tying the ship to the rowboats and rowing it further north away from the British artillery. The Louisiana was not able to sail northward under her own power due to the attack. These 2 vessels were now no longer a danger to the British, but Jackson ordered the ship's surviving guns and crew to be stationed on the west bank and provide covering fire for any British assault on the river road to line Jackson, name of the US defensive line at the Rodriguez Canal, and New Orleans. After silencing the 2 ships, Pakenham ordered a reconnaissance in force on December 28th against the earthworks. The reconnaissance in force was designed to test Line Jackson and see how well defended it was, and if any section of the line was weak, the British would take advantage of the situation, break through and call for thousands of more soldiers to smash through the defences. On the right side of this offensive, the British soldiers successfully sent the militia defenders into a retreating panic with their huge show of force, and were just a few hundred yards from breaching the defensive line. But the left side of the reconnaissance in force turned into disaster for the British. The surviving artillery guns from the two neutralized warships successfully defended the section of Line Jackson closest to the Mississippi River with enfilading fire, making it look like the British offensive completely failed, even though on the section closest to the swamp, the British were on the verge of breaking through. Pakenham inexplicably decided to withdraw all the soldiers after seeing the left side of his reconnaissance in force collapsing and retreating in panic. The British suffered 16 killed and 43 wounded, and the Americans suffered 7 killed and 10 wounded. Luck saved Line Jackson on this day, and this was the closest the British came during the whole campaign to defeating Jackson. After the failure of this operation, Pakenham met with General Keane and Admiral Cochrane that evening for an update on the situation. Pakenham wanted to use Chef-Mentor Pass as the invasion route, but he was overruled by Admiral Cochrane, who insisted that his boats were providing everything needed. Admiral Cochrane believed that the veteran British soldiers would easily destroy Jackson's ramshackle army, and he allegedly said that if the army did not do it, his sailors would. And the meeting settled the method and place of the attack. H. Charles McBarron, Free Men of Color and Choctaw Indian Volunteers at New Orleans, Louisiana. When the British reconnaissance force withdrew, the Americans immediately began constructing earthworks to protect the artillery batteries, further strengthening Line Jackson. They installed 8 batteries, which included one 32-pound gun, 3 24-pounders, one 18-pounder, 3 12-pounders, 3 6-pounders, and a 6-inch, 150 mm howitzer. Jackson also sent a detachment to the west bank of the Mississippi to man 2 24-pounders and 2 12-pounders on the grounded warship USS Louisiana. Even so, the British greatly outnumbered the Americans. Jackson's total of 4,732 men was made up of 968 Army regulars, 58 Marines, holding the center of the defensive line, 106 Navy seamen, 1,060 Louisiana militia and volunteers, including 462 black people, 1,352 Tennessee militia, 986 Kentucky militia, 150 Mississippi militia, and 52 Choctaw warriors, along with a force from pirate Jean Lafitte's Baratarians. Jackson, in the first week of the New Orleans land campaign that began on December 23rd, also had the support of the warships in the Mississippi River, including USS Louisiana, USS Carolina, the schooner USS Eagle, and the steamboat Enterprise. The naval warships were neutralized by the heavy naval artillery guns brought in by Pakenham and Cochrane a few days after Christmas. Major Thomas Heinz's squadron of light dragoons, a militia unit from the Mississippi Territory, arrived at the battle on December 22nd. Artillery Dual Battery 4 in the middle of Line Jackson contained the biggest American artillery gun, a naval 32-pounder that was transferred from the USS Carolina before she was sunk by the British. The main British army arrived on New Year's Day, 1815, and began an artillery bombardment of the American earthworks. Jackson's headquarters, McCarty House, was fired at for the first 10 minutes of the skirmish while Jackson and his officers were eating breakfast. The house was completely destroyed, but Jackson and the officers escaped harm. The Americans recovered quickly and mobilized their own artillery to fire back at the British artillery. This began an exchange of artillery fire that continued for 3 hours. Several of the American guns were silenced while some damage was done to the earthworks. The British suffered even greater, losing 13 guns. 5 British batteries out of 7 total batteries were silenced by the Americans. The remaining British artillery finally exhausted its ammunition and Pakenham cancelled the attack. Major General Gibbs, during the artillery duel, sent soldiers to try to outflank Line Jackson on the right due to the near success of the December 28th skirmish. A combined force of Tennessee militia and Choctaw warriors used heavy small arms fire to repel this maneuver. The Tennessee and Choctaw soldiers even moved forward in front of Line Jackson and counterattacked guerrilla style. to guarantee the British withdrawal. After yet another failure to breach Line Jackson, Pakenham decided to wait for his entire force of 8,000 men to assemble before continuing his attack. The 40th Foot arrived too late, disembarking on the 12th of January 1815. The British lost 45 killed and 55 wounded in the artillery duel, and the Americans lost 11 killed and 23 wounded. Jackson gained widespread recognition for his decisive victories against the Creek Indians in the Creek War, a conflict that demonstrated his military prowess and ruthlessness. His reputation as a fearless leader and a skilled tactician grew with each battle. Jackson's finest hour came at the Battle of New Orleans, a resounding victory against the British that occurred after the Treaty of Ghent had been signed, unbeknownst to those on the battlefield. The victory cemented Jackson's status as a national hero, transforming him into a symbol of American resilience and military might. Yet, Jackson's military victories were often accompanied by controversy. His campaigns against Native Americans were marked by brutality and displacement, foreshadowing the forced removals that would define his presidency. His legacy as a military leader, while undoubtedly impressive, remains intertwined with the tragic consequences of westward expansion and the displacement of indigenous populations. Andrew Jackson, the people's president. Jackson's military fame propelled him into the national spotlight, making him a popular figure in the burgeoning American democracy. He embodied the spirit of the frontier, rugged, independent, and distrustful of Eastern elites. His image as a self-made man who had risen from humble beginnings resonated deeply with ordinary Americans. In the 1824 presidential election, Jackson won the popular vote but lost in a controversial election decided by the House of Representatives. The outcome fueled his supporters' belief that the system was rigged against them, further solidifying Jackson's image as a champion of the common man. 4 years later, Jackson swept to victory in the 1828 presidential election, ushering in an era of Jacksonian democracy. His presidency was marked by a significant expansion of suffrage, with property requirements for voting being abolished in many states. Jackson firmly believed in the wisdom of the common man and sought to empower ordinary citizens in the political process. Section 5. The Bank War and the Rise of Jacksonian Democracy. Andrew Jackson's presidency was marked by a series of political battles that redefined the relationship between the executive branch and the other branches of government. One of the most significant of these was his war against the Second Bank of the United States. Jackson viewed the bank as a symbol of Eastern elitism and a threat to the economic well-being of ordinary Americans. He believed it favored wealthy investors and speculators while holding back farmers and small businessmen. His veto of the bank's charter renewal was a bold assertion of presidential power and a defining moment in his presidency. The bank war had far-reaching consequences, contributing to the emergence of the Whig Party, a new political force opposed to Jackson's policies. It also led to a period of economic instability, as the removal of federal deposits from the bank triggered a financial panic. However, Jackson's victory over the bank solidified his image as a fearless champion of the common man and cemented his legacy as one of the most consequential presidents in American history.